We're constantly being told what to think, when to think, and how to think about it when it comes to the Idaho 4 by legal experts, former law enforcement, and former judges. But it won't be legal experts, former law enforcement officers, or former judges making the decision on whether Bryan's guilty or innocent. It will be a jury of his peers. And it's the questions behind the questions within this video that should have everybody thinking, is there a reasonable expectation to see reasonable doubt in this story? That being said, everything's alleged. Welcome to the point. Let's get to it.
Chief suspect Bryan Kohberger.
Now, to be fair, Nancy Grace is a former prosecutor, so her perspective is skewed from the get-go. In fact, I've never seen her go against what the state is trying to say. Now, if you know that to be different, you can let me know down in the comments below because this is an open discussion channel. But as far as I'm concerned, she'll tell you a booger's guilty if she has the opportunity to do so.
Says he's out alone, driving in the late night and early morning hours, November 12 and 13. But the trial judge doubles down on Kohberger's defense team, insisting you've got to hand over a witness other than the moon and the stars. The defense likely to rely on cell phone data to try and place Bryan Kohberger somewhere, anywhere other than the King Road address. The judge says he was out driving during the late night and early morning hours, November 12 to 13, 2022. That's his alibi. The judge doubled down on Kohberger in court in the last hour, saying, you've got to give us a witness or the evidence you're bringing on to corroborate this. What do I think it is? No witness at all. It's going to be cell phone data. The defense claims places Kohberger somewhere entirely different than the King Road address.
Now, my original thought was this is the worst alibi I've ever heard. But in all seriousness, it's not that far-fetched or impossible, especially when you consider you have 24-hour cities and 24-hour news cycles. And why would Bryan have a load of friends? He came all the way across country to get his PhD in criminology. So him not having a load of friends to hang out with at 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning isn't necessarily out of the realm of possible. People do drive at night, they drive by themselves. It's not a rare occurrence. Just because somebody is driving at night, it doesn't make them a suspect in a criminal case. But it's the timeline within this video that's interesting, more specifically what we don't see within the timeline. So check this out.
Let's see the timeline. Isn't it true, Caitlin Hornick, that Kohberger, we can prove, turned his phone off and on the night of the... Just a yes, no.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so just a yes or no question's all we need. We can move on. There's a very specific reason she only wanted a yes or no answer, because a more detailed answer does cast doubt. And as we said in the beginning, she's not in the business of casting doubt. Now, for them to say that Bryan turned off his phone and they know that to be factual is factually incorrect. I'll pull up what the probable cause affidavit says specifically. In fact, it says the cell phone wasn't communicating with cellular towers. Now, does that mean he turned it off? Possibly. Does that mean he's flipped it to airplane mode? Possibly as well. In fact, if he did physically turn his phone off or take out his battery or put it in airplane mode, law enforcement should, if they did a proper investigation, be able to prove that. They have reason to believe that he turned his phone off or left it at another location because that is what they happen to see the most, or at least that's what Payne's saying in that affidavit. But we don't know any of this to be factual. None of this has came up at trial. And as she said, the defense is attacking a lot of this. And they're attacking it for two reasons. There's probably some validity to some of it, but also they need to build a record. But to say we know for a fact this particular thing happened is an absolute lie. But let's hear what else she has to say.
Take a look at this, Caitlin Hornick, joining us from the Sun. 2:42, his phone is on at his apartment in Pullman. I went there. It's about an 8-minute drive from the murder scene. 8 to 12 minutes. 2:47, he turns his phone off. Who on this panel turns your phone off when you're going driving?
A lot of people do, or your phone loses signal.
I would keep mine on just in case I had a 911. Anyway, he turns his off. We know that, and that is irrefutable. I'm going to circle back in a moment to Bill Slater, who says you got to take your battery out of your phone to be untraceable. Just turning it off, hey, we know you're doing that. 2:47, this guy is up and about.
You already said that, but we don't know that to be true.
3:29, not cell phone, but video surveillance from a nearby home a residence, shows a white sedan passing the King Road address that looks, oops, just like his white Elantra. 404, the sedan returns and stops in front of the King Road address. 420, 16 minutes later, the white sedan scratches off, taking off like a bat out of hell at a high speed, leaving the King Road address.
First of all, they have all this surveillance footage available. They have surveillance footage of him circling the house 3 times. They have surveillance footage of him parking in front of the home and then moving again. And they have surveillance footage of him leaving that area in a high rate of speed. Or at least that's what they claim. What is the thing we're not seeing within the probable cause affidavit in these stories? Is video surveillance footage of Bryan Kohberger in the vehicle. With all the cameras that we have out there today, has anybody seen any image of Bryan Kohberger in that vehicle? As law enforcement said in the probable cause affidavit, that they see Bryan Kohberger or a white male with bushy eyebrows in this particular vehicle. No, they don't, and if they did, let me know. So law enforcement needs to put Bryan Kohberger in 1122 King Road. Don't talk about the knife sheath yet, we're going to get to that in a minute. But do they have video surveillance footage of Bryan Kohberger getting out of that vehicle and going towards the home? Better yet, do they have video surveillance footage of him leaving the home, for example? Do they have anything putting this guy inside the home? The state has to prove beyond a reasonable doubt. And if they don't have anything putting him physically inside that home, what else is this story but a load of reasonable doubt? Where is the footage of him in the vehicle? Unless they're trying to say all the footage they claim to have is like this one. And if all these images are grainy or blurry, then I don't know how they prove that he was actually inside that particular vehicle at that particular time at that location. But since we're on the subject of the vehicle, what did law enforcement say very early on? They had 2,200 registered Hyundai Elantras fitting that description in the state of Idaho. Not only did they have 2,200 Hyundai Elantras fitting that description, they apparently didn't have Bryan Kohberger's vehicle fitting that description because his vehicle year was different than the ones identified by the FBI. Now, is that a major snafu and proves that isn't Bryan's vehicle in that footage that they claim to have? Not necessarily. But it can tie into a narrative of a rushed investigation or a potential botched investigation when you start stacking all the inconsistencies up. Now, some people call it muddy in the waters, which is fine. This is a free country. But if the waters are getting that muddy, then the water you're trying to sell isn't necessarily that clean. A very valid question to law enforcement is going to be, why did you misidentify this vehicle? And how did it magically change right when the probable cause affidavit came out?
And then 28 minutes later, and for me, it was about an hour drive, 4:48 a.m., 28 minutes later, that phone is turned back on, and it's pinging south of Moscow, Idaho, State Highway 95. I took that drive to Professor Forensics, Jacksonville State University, author of Beneath My Feet on Amazon, star of a hit series, Bags, and most important for me right now, forensic expert and investigator, Joe Scott. He's between a rock and a hard spot. I want you to analyze everything Slater has told us, but also we are poking a little bit of fun at the moon and the stargazing alibi. But think about it. What else is Ann Taylor, the defense lawyer, going to say? He was at the party with all of his friends? That ain't happening. They got to come up with something to make sense to a jury. Why he may have been out driving around. The only thing they can do is refute the cell phone data because that video surveillance.
Isn't that the only thing they would have to do when you consider the amount of time people spend with their phone and the fact that that thing tracks almost anything and everything you say and do? I would say refuting cellular data in this day and age is pretty huge. In a lot of ways, cell phone data or cellular data, whatever you want to say, is as big and as important as DNA, just not touch DNA. And in a scenario where the defense can say, we have all this data from Bryan's phone and all these pictures from Bryan's phone showing that this individual drove around late at night by himself. Here's the pictures. Here's the GPS signal. That would be huge for the defense. And that's not something the state's going to easily be able to refute. I mean, I get it. Having an alibi that says you're driving around during the night of this attack is crazy, but man, if that's what you do, that's what you do. And the jury will have to be the finder of fact here. Not Nancy Grace or not some other talking head or some other moron on YouTube like myself. It'll be the jury. We'll see how this shakes out. But we have a lot more inconsistencies than consistencies with this story as I see it. I mean, to force this narrative that it's a fact he turned his phone off was as ridiculous as that narrative of him stalking. I mean, they need a lot of this to happen. They need a lot of this to be true. Now, if it is, okay, that's fine. We can hear about it at trial. But to insist it's factual now is ridiculous. There's even individuals saying, well, they're not going to be able to prove he flipped his phone off or put it in airplane mode because they had a Faraday bag. Fine, cool, show me where he bought it. If the state is trying to say he put that in a Faraday bag, they need to prove he purchased one and prove that it's not in his possession right now. I mean, this story, as we know it, is not nearly as shut as they think it is. In fact, it is more open than shut. I can't say it enough. I mean, if the guy did it, he should pay. But this rush to absolution without knowing all the information should scare the hell out of everybody. And what's scaring me is it's not scaring y'all, if that makes any sense.
I don't think it's got its car tag.
No, it doesn't. But that's all they can do, Nancy, isn't it? You know, when you begin to think about it, they're muddying the waters.
Let's talk about this muddy in the waters and digital back and forth. Does everybody remember the street view surrounding 1122 King Road before they blurred it all and backdated a lot of those pictures? Because if we're looking for a vehicle similar to a 2011 to 2013 Hyundai Elantra, which is what law enforcement said they were looking for, I mean, my God, there's plenty around the home. I'll show you right here. There's one, and there's one. In fact, if I was on the jury, I'd be highly curious to know how many other cell numbers pinged in the area during the time of this attack. Forgetting the fact that they changed the time of the attack multiple times, but anyways, of the phone numbers that pinged in the area during the time of this attack, how many of them had a similar vehicle to Bryan Kohberger's? And what is the potential that the vehicle they're actually looking for is silver, if all the video surveillance footage surrounding the home is black and white? I mean, honestly, I could go on and on, but there's more to this video, so let's wrap it up.
With all of this digital back and forth, here's the one thing that they cannot overcome. Get this number in your mind. 5.37 octillion. That goes to his DNA profile. That means that the chances that it was somebody else are at that range. It's amazing, isn't it? Look what I have here. See?
As you can see, he's holding up the sheath. We're going to talk about that in a second. I'm not going to talk about the DNA at length here because I've already done it multiple times. You can go to the playlist. But wrap this number around your mind. One surviving eyewitness who made noise during the time of the attack leaves unscathed. But anyways, the sheath on its own may be everything or it may be nothing. I mean, Kathy Mabbitt did describe injuries inflicted to those four innocent people that didn't necessarily match what a K-bar would do, or what I would consider a K-bar being able to do. In fact, if you want to see a video on it, go to my playlist. It says K-bar right there in the thumbnail. But a lot is hinging on the sheath. Whether it's a red flag or not, it's to be determined, but it doesn't tie Bryan Kohberger to the home. A sheath is a movable object, and skin cell DNA that we presume to be on the sheath is easily transferable. What do they have putting Bryan in the home? Is there hair? Is there sweat? Is there spit? Is there something else we don't know about? Because a sheath on its own isn't necessarily enough. And they're still going to have to prove that he bought that sheath somewhere, whether it be online or at a store. If they can prove it's his, they need to prove that he doesn't have it in his possession. And they need to show when he bought it, when it was delivered to his house, and when he picked it up. Or when he physically went into the store to pick it up. If they can't do that, this means nothing. This will mean nothing to the jury. They can't sit there and say, well, he bought the sheath a few years ago, so we don't have any evidence he purchased it, but here it is. I mean, that's just not going to fly. At least it wouldn't fly to me. There's a lot the state needs to prove here, and let's stop pretending like Bill Thompson's hitting home runs. In fact, more often than not, he's looked like a lamb rather than a lion, and we've seen him get flustered on multiple occasions. Especially when Ann Taylor gets all fired up. But the fact that they're not asking these particular questions on this channel is concerning. The mainstream media seems to be forcing a narrative, and a narrative we've heard 1,000 times. And that narrative doesn't always pan out the way they say it would. Now, the sheep will be sheep. It is what it is. But everybody has the presumption of innocence. Everybody has a constitutional right to that presumption of innocence. There is a real legitimate reason these types of things aren't coming up on these types of channels, and that reason is they don't want to hear it. They don't want to have doubt. And if you enjoy this and a more open conversation, maybe check one of these videos out. Y'all be safe now.